Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the canopy of a dripping Tasmanian forest, where the fog coils like old breath and every leaf glistens under gentle rain. You're alone except you're not. Somewhere nearby, hidden behind curtains of moss and shadow, something once moved. Something striped. Something quiet. You follow the sound of the rain tapping fern fronds like fingers on glass. It's not loud, not jarring, just steady enough to soothe your mind as if the forest itself is whispering lullabies. Your boots sink slightly into the soft forest floor. The air smells of eucalyptus and damp bark. Every few steps you glance sideways. You swear something just slipped behind that tree. Again. The locals still whisper about it, the Tasmanian tiger. Or more properly, the Thylacine. You've seen grainy photos of it, maybe that black and white footage, where it yawns like it's already tired of being misunderstood. But here, in this dripping hush of green and brown, the idea that it might still be out there doesn't feel absurd. It feels likely. You probably won't survive this, by the way, if this were real. You're moving through terrain that's part wilderness, part time machine. No cell signal, no GPS. Just mismemory, and the occasional sharp rock that sends a jolt up your spine. You're walking a trail the Thylacine knew by heart, and now barely anyone remembers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The trail narrows. You duck beneath a branch sagging with rainwater beads trembling like nervous thoughts. The sky is gray, just like every Thylacine photo you've ever seen. Colorless, blurred at the edges. That's what extinction does. It doesn't banish things in a flash. It smudges them out slowly until you're not sure what you saw at all. The forest isn't silent. It's alive with careful noises. Rain patters a distant bird, clucks your boots, squelch. But there's a strange emptiness too. It's the kind of emptiness biologists call shifting baseline syndrome. You feel like something should be here and isn't. That something once had the size of a medium dog with fur, striped like a barcode across its back. Its jaws could open wider than a snake's. But most unusually, it wasn't a dog or a cat, it was a marsupial. Which means that just like kangaroos and wombats, the Thylacine carried its young in a pouch. Except in this case, both the females and the males had pouches. Yes, male pouches. Biology went wild with this one. You duck into a hollow following an old logging track that's now half swallowed by ferns. Rain trickles through your collar. Somewhere out here, more than 90 years ago, the last wild Thylacine likely padded through this very underbrush. Maybe it paused, sniffed the air, blinked those big soft eyes and vanished before any human could reach for a camera. Historians still argue whether that extinction was final. The official death of the last known Thylacine Benjamin happened in a Hobart Zoo in 1936. But Tasmania is a land that doesn't give up its ghosts easily. Since Benjamin, there have been hundreds of alleged sightings. Paw prints, howls, flashlight glimpses. Fringe researchers swear it's still out there. Mainstream science rolls its eyes, but not too hard. You crouch at a spot where the moss seems recently disturbed. Not freshly, just unsettled. You stare, eyes narrowing, nothing. But then a breeze passes cool and piney. For a second, you can almost see it, the long tail dragging through wet leaves. The stiff-legged walk. the pointed ears twitching at the thunder far off over the ridgeline. In 1803, when British colonists arrived in Tasmania, thylacines were already elusive. Aboriginal Tasmanians had lived alongside them for millennia, sometimes hunting them, sometimes weaving them into Dreamtime lore. But Europeans, they took one look at the thylacine's jaw and stripes and screamed sheep killer, which wasn't entirely fair. Studies of preserved stomach contents suggest that thylacines probably ate small wallabies, birds, and the occasional wounded sheep. They weren't efficient predators of livestock, not like introduced dogs. But still, by the mid-1800s, settlers were handing out government bounties like candy. Shoot one, get paid. No questions asked. You reach a clearing where the trees thin out and the sky opens just enough for a little more rain to kiss your shoulders. You pause. The wind moves differently here. This might have been a den site. There's a hollow beneath a large log padded with old leaf mulch and animal hair that's long since rotted into memory. Imagine crouching there in the cold rain, dripping off your snout, your pups squirming in your pouch, while above ground men with guns and dogs sniff out your scent. You wouldn't make a sound. You'd press yourself to the earth like a ghost that still wants to live. The tragedy of the thylacine isn't that it vanished quickly. It's that we knew it was vanishing and chose paperwork over protection. In 1936, the same year Benjamin died, the Tasmanian government finally passed laws to protect the species. 2 months later. Talk about missing the boat and the ark. But maybe the forest remembers. Maybe it dreams. Maybe some night. Maybe this night a lone thylacine stirs beneath the dripping ferns, opened its wide jaws in a silent yawn, and remembers you. The rain keeps falling. The forest grows darker. You keep walking. The ferns around you sway gently as you press deeper into the forest rain, still whispering its quiet secrets above. It's as if the trees are conspiring to keep you out or keep something in. You brush past a cluster of bracken and freeze, just for a second. A rustle, then nothing. You squint hard, thudding softly in your chest like a drum muffled by moss. There, between two tree trunks, a flicker of movement. Not large, but unmistakably striped. Then it's gone. Vanished like it never existed, like most thylacine sightings since 1936. It's strange how the mind plays tricks when you're cold, damp, and surrounded by things older than memory. But let's humor that glimpse. You just saw a thylacine. Probably, maybe. That's how the stories always start. 1 second of motion and then decades of speculation. As you crouch behind a fern, raindrops gathering at the tips of your lashes, let's rewind the story a little. Thylacines or Thylacinus cynocephalus. If you're feeling science-y, once roamed the mainland of Australia, not just Tasmania. Fossils confirm their presence all over the place. They were already a thing tens of thousands of years ago, striding through eucalyptus groves and howling into empty skies. But about 3,000 years ago, they vanished from the mainland. Why? Well, historians still argue whether it was due to climate shifts, competition with dingoes, or just really bad luck. The dingo theory gets the most attention. Dingoes arrived in Australia around 4,000 years ago, and unlike the thylacine, were super adaptable, more social, better at pack hunting, more interested in you if you happen to trip over a root, and lie there like an easy snack. The thylacine, not so much, and Tasmania being isolated by the Bass Strait, never got dingoes. So thylacines survived there. Like old software running on a forgotten system, long after the update had wiped them off the rest of the continent. That's why Tasmania became their final refuge. Or prison, depending on how you see it. The stripes. Let's talk about those. Up close, or as close as one could ever get, they started at the lower back and stretched all the way to the base of the tail. About 15 to 20 of them, bold and dark against dusty brown fur. These weren't fashion stripes. They were camouflage. Nature's barcode. When the thylacine slunk through thick underbrush or crouched among tree roots, the stripes broke up its outline. Blink, and it was gone. Some early European settlers called it the hyena because of those stripes. Others swore it was a tiger, hence the name Tasmanian Tiger. But the thylacine was neither. It was its own strange, quiet category. A solitary, crepuscular, marsupial carnivore. Not built for speed. Not interested in groups. Kind of like you when your phone's on Do Not Disturb. You step through a shallow stream water cool and clean around your boots. Insects scatter. A frog blurts out a complaint. It's just you and the ghost stripes now. Early illustrations of the thylacine. How do we say this gently creative? A mix of wild guesswork and artistic panic. Some looked like wolves with kangaroo legs. Others resembled sad lions with awkward shoulders. It wasn't until photography caught up that people started realizing just how odd the thylacine's build was. Long, stiff tail like a kangaroo. Short, stocky legs. A posture that always looked a little embarrassed, like it had walked into a party in the wrong outfit. And yet, for all its awkwardness, the thylacine was an apex predator. Tasmania had no large carnivores to challenge it. It didn't need speed when nothing else could threaten it, until humans arrived with sheep guns and a complete inability to understand ecological balance. You pause near a fallen tree, bark peeled off in wet ribbons, fungi clinging like ruffled collars. You can almost imagine a thylacine curling beneath it, sheltering from the rain ears, flicking at thunder, breathing deep. A curious quirk, thylacines had a unique gait. Their hind legs were longer than the front, giving them a kind of rocking motion when they walked. They couldn't gallop like a dog or fox. Instead, they loped or bounced. One eyewitness described it as awkward elegance, which is also how you probably look trying to sneak to the fridge at 2 a.m. Even weirder, when startled thylacines could hop. Like kangaroos. That's not a joke. There's actual video footage, grainy black and white, but unmistakable, of ones in a zoo, doing a two-footed bound when startled. Historians still argue whether this hopping was a panic reaction or a normal part of its movement toolkit. But honestly, imagine the existential crisis of watching something that looks like a wolf suddenly bounce like a bunny. Evolution really had fun with this one. As you climb a shallow rise, the forest opens slightly. More light filters through the mist. You see scattered bones, likely from a wallaby gnawed clean long ago. A thylacine might have done this, or a devil, or just time itself. The indigenous Palawa people had stories about the thylacine, stories passed down in smoke and song. They didn't see it as a monster, but as part of the land's rhythm, a necessary silence between louder beasts. Some Dreamtime stories describe it as a spirit animal, not fearsome, not meek, just present, observing, walking parallel to humans, until we forgot how to walk alongside it. You run your fingers over a stone wall, remnants of a colonial sheepfold. Moss has reclaimed it, vines curling through the cracks. How many thylacines were shot from this very vantage? How many bullets paid for in bounty slips and pub rounds? There's a fringe theory that makes the rounds in wildlife circles. What if the thylacine adapted? What if it learned to avoid roads, cameras, drones, that it became an apex ghost, present but too clever now to show itself, living only in pockets of land no one bothers to hike? It's far-fetched. But out here, with rain soft on your shoulders and the forest swallowing the past, it doesn't feel impossible. The storm overhead deepens. The rain isn't just a sound anymore, it's a blanket. You let it soak in, each drop a whisper from a time that's not quite gone. Something rustles again, but you don't chase it this time. You just listen. Because maybe, just maybe, the thylacine isn't gone. Not entirely. Maybe it's here, watching, quiet, striped. And tonight so are you. The rain shifts just a little heavier now, as if the sky's starting to remember something. Or mourn it. You're soaked, of course, but that stopped bothering you a few muddy steps ago. Everything smells of wet bark and sweet rot. The kind of forest perfume that clings to your jacket for days. You slow down when you spotted another flicker in the trees. Just to your left. Not a full silhouette, more like the ghost of a movement. The way light plays tricks through dripping leaves. You pause, heart giving that little bump of ancient mammal alarm. But no growl follows. No footsteps. Just the endless patter of rain and your own imagination, which frankly deserves an Oscar by now. The thylacine was a creature built to confuse. Not just us moderns with our apps and trail cams and biologists squinting at paw prints, but the very people who tried to categorize it. Even back when it was still roaming in plain sight. Imagine being an early settler. You land in Tasmania, expecting sheep, maybe some inconveniently large insects. And then you see this thing. It's got the head of a fox, the ears of a bat, the body of a mutt, the tail of a kangaroo, and a pattern like a tiger. Also, it has a pouch. And if you're especially lucky, it yawns wide enough to make your spine itch. Naturally, you'd assume the devil made it, which might be why so many early colonists lumped the thylacine in with Tasmanian devils as another evil thing to be eradicated. That, or they were just tired of losing chickens. The thylacine probably didn't even take many chickens, mind you. But once a scapegoat is chosen, the facts are irrelevant. Historians still argue whether the thylacine ever posed a real threat to livestock or whether it just looked guilty enough to make a good villain. Most modern analysis suggests it was slow, shy, and had weak jaws, compared to, say, feral dogs. But the damage was done. The bounty system was in place by the 1830s. Government-approved extinction. A soft chuckle escapes you as you step over a fallen log. Imagine the paperwork. Dear Sir, enclosed. Please find the severed tail of what I assure you is an adult male thylacine shot at dusk while loitering suspiciously near sheep, followed no doubt by a half-drunk receipt and a free pint at the pub. By 1909, the bounty system was officially ended. The population was already crumbling by then. Habitat loss, hunting disease, pick your poison. But it was another 27 years before any form of legal protection was even attempted. 1936. The same year the last known thylacine died. You couldn't script it worse if you tried. That thylacine, Benjamin they called him, was held in a concrete pen at the Hobart Zoo. He'd been there for years, mostly ignored, misclassified, and underfed. In his final footage, he paces, yawns, stretches. Not a performance, just waiting. They didn't even know it was the last one. No preservation orders. No controlled breeding. Benjamin froze to death in his pen after zookeepers accidentally locked him outside overnight. A bureaucratic accident with the weight of extinction. You pause near a knot of tree roots, twisted like old knuckles. Sit for a moment. Let the rain run down your neck. This forest, it knew Benjamin, knew his kin. It watched them pass in quiet rhythm, silent predators of the understory. It remembers. There's a strange kind of peace in that. The thylacine may be gone, but its home never forgot the shape of its paws. And maybe it still walks here, just out of frame. Let's shift gears slightly. Ever heard of convergent evolution? It's when two completely unrelated animals evolve similar traits because they live in similar environments. Like how bats and birds both developed wings. Or how dolphins and ichthyosaurs look like they swapped fashion tips across time. The thylacine was one of evolution's weirdest examples of this. It was a marsupial, sure, but it looked moved and hunted like a wolf. Scientists still marvel at how close its skull structure came to that of a canid, despite being separated by over 100 million years of evolution. The jaw lines are almost identical until you peer inside and realize the internal wiring is completely different. Nature didn't copy-paste. It just solved the same problem twice. But this also led to one big misunderstanding. Early zoologists assumed the thylacine was a kind of wolf. They lumped it in with foxes and wild dogs. Only later did closer inspection and marsupial anatomy force the revision. That pouch was a dead giveaway. So were the teeth, the hips, and the fact that it chewed like it had never read the manual. You reach a small rise in the forest, the earth rising subtly crowned with a ring of broken stones. Maybe a hunting blind, maybe just the earth's version of a broken promise. You perch there, eyes scanning the mist. Here's a fun tidbit: the thylacine's jaw could open to an absurd angle nearly 80 degrees. That's wider than any modern mammal. Picture a living zipper just yawning its way through extinction. Historians still argue whether this gaping maw served any real purpose, or was just a side effect of bizarre skeletal engineering. Some say it let them grab prey in one decisive chomp. Others believe it was just for show intimidation theater in a forest with few other actors. You shift a few pebbles tumbling from underfoot. A tree creaks. Somewhere far off, a wallaby thumps the ground. Or something else. Even as the thylacine declined, the myths grew. You'd expect memory to fade, but instead, it multiplied. Every farmer with a spooked dog, every camper who heard a cough in the bushes, added another thread to the tapestry. The thylacine became Australia's Bigfoot, its Loch Ness. But with more science behind the rumors. And those rumors are persistent. Hundreds of reported sightings since the 1940s. Blurry photos, dirt-smeared casts of paw prints, breathless late-night radio interviews. Every few years, someone claims they found one alive hiding elusive. Yet no proof ever follows. Just the sound of rain washing the tracks away. Still, you understand it now. You've walked where they walked, crouched where they hid. You get why people keep hoping. Because even extinction, when it's soft and quiet and half-believed, leaves the door cracked open just enough. And right now, as the rain dances in soft ripples down your sleeves, you think maybe you saw one too. The trail vanishes again. Not abruptly, more like it slowly forgets it was ever a trail. Leaves pile deeper, roots coil tighter, and the ferns reach higher, as if they're trying to rewrite the path behind you. You lean into the slope, each step a little sloshy, a little slower. Everything's wet. Your hair, your jacket, your eyelashes, even your thoughts feel waterlogged, but it's peaceful. That kind of deep forest peace, where nothing is in a hurry. Where time doesn't march, it pats quietly like a striped paw on soft loam. You've heard the phrase, thylacine sighting, tossed around before, usually in a half-whisper paired with nervous laughter. That's how it always starts. Someone in the Midlands sees something crossing a back road. Someone else swears they caught glowing eyes outside their caravan. But out here in this fog-draped silence, those stories suddenly feel less absurd. The forest feels like it's still hiding something. Or someone. Let's talk about those sightings. They haven't stopped. In fact, they've increased. Not by much and not with great quality unless you count footage that looks like it was filmed by a half-blind squirrel on a trampoline. But they're consistent. Every few months, a blurry shape on a trail cam. A tail that's definitely not a dog. An awkward gait caught in the corner of someone's dash cam. YouTube's got a playlist of them. All inconclusive. All haunting. One of the most compelling cases. A series of thermal camera clips recorded by a team in the Thylacine rainforest. Shapes moving oddly too stiff for a wallaby, too upright for a possum. Scientists still argue whether the figures were misidentified devils or clever hoaxes, but the footage sparked a small media frenzy. That is, until it didn't. The news cycle moved on, but the forest never did. You crouch again beside a moody impression in the soil. Could be a wallaby print, but it's elongated, narrow, almost paw-like. No claws though. That's what gives it away. Unlike dogs, thylacines had non-retractable claws, but their prints didn't leave sharp nail marks. That's how trackers tried to distinguish them carefully, and often wrongly. In 1982, a wildlife officer named Hans Narding was doing a nocturnal survey in northwest Tasmania. At about 1 a.m., during a rainstorm much like this one, he claimed to have seen a thylacine cross the road in front of his vehicle. He watched it for several minutes before it disappeared into the brush. Nardine was a professional, not a crank. And yet, no evidence followed. No fur, no scat, just one man's word and a wave of hope. The sighting was taken seriously enough to trigger an official search. A real one with scientists and dogs and maps with thumbtacks in all the dramatic places. They searched the area for weeks. Found nothing. Typical. But sightings kept happening. In the 1990s, a tourism operator in South Australia, yes, not even Tasmania, claimed to have seen a family of thylacines moving through the bush. He said there were 4 of them, 2 adults, 2 pups. Described their movements in detail. Described the stripes. Described the posture. Naturally, he didn't get a photo. Naturally, everyone rolled their eyes. But he stuck to the story. And then there's Michael Moss, a name whispered in thylacine enthusiast circles. Not because he saw one, but because he built a dedicated thylacine tracking team. Volunteers, hikers, locals, all quietly slipping through Tasmania's forgotten corners with cameras and long-lens hope. They've never confirmed a sighting, but they haven't given up either. You brush rain from your brow and let out a long sigh. It steams slightly in the cool air. There's something absurd about this chasing rumors through the dark, but there's also something noble, something very human. We want to believe that not everything is gone, that some mistakes can be undone even if only in legend. Historians still argue whether these sightings should be taken seriously or whether they're just a symptom of ecological grief. You know the collective guilt we carry for what's been lost, for species we erased. We crave redemption stories. We need to imagine that somewhere out there, life continues in secret. You step over a log and find yourself in a different kind of space. A hollow dense, with tree ferns and tall grass. But quieter. More still. Almost reverent. If you were a thylacine, you'd hide here. Not because it's warm, just because no one would think to look. It's in these hollows that some of the most persistent legends linger. Like the farmer in Derby who swore he found thylacine droppings behind his barn, stringy fur bones the works. DNA tests later suggested dog origin, but the farmer insisted, swore up and down he knew the difference. Or the hiker in the Western Tiers, who saw a striped tail flick into the underbrush. She didn't report it for 6 months, afraid people would laugh. Eventually, she drew a sketch and mailed it anonymously to a local paper. They printed it. Got 3 more anonymous letters afterward, all from people claiming they'd seen the same thing. And then there's the bush legend of the Ghost Den, a hollow near Mount Roland, where thylacines supposedly still raise their young. Locals pass the story down like a family heirloom. No one's ever found the place. Of course not. Ghost dens aren't meant to be found. You sit down on a wet stone and stretch your legs. The air smells of crushed mint and moss. Your breath fogs faintly. You close your eyes and just listen. To the rain, to the wind, to what might still be out there, just out of sight. Because sometimes when you stop searching and just listen, you realize the forest isn't empty at all. It's full, just not in ways that cameras can see. You remember that shadow you saw earlier, the stripes in the trees. You've stopped trying to explain it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Or maybe not. Either way, it's enough. You stand again, boots sucking gently at the soil, and walk on. Because even if the thylacine is truly gone, its legend walks with you. The slope levels out beneath your boots, and now you're somewhere deeper geographically and atmospherically. The trees here are older, thick-bellied giants with roots like knotted ropes, and bark stained dark by generations of rain. A place that feels like it existed before maps remembered to include Tasmania. You pause at the mouth of a hollow beneath a gnarled tree, just wide enough for a crouching creature to slip through. Your flashlight beam dances across the opening, catching a glint of water, and a low ceiling carved from clay and root. It smells like old fur, damp soil, and the silence of something that once lived here with purpose. Welcome to the den. This isn't the den, of course. Not in any provable sense. But it might as well be. This is the kind of hideaway the thylacine would have used to rear her young huddled in the darkness, listening to the wind outside, like it was gossip from the treetops. You crouch and slide partway into the hollow. The air grows cooler. Still, the only sound is the rain tracing circles into puddles outside. Thylacine dens were never elaborate, no grand constructions, just natural hollows, fallen logs, or shallow caves padded with grass and fur, enough to keep pups warm, dry, and hidden. The female thylacine, like her marsupial cousins, kept her young in a backward-facing pouch, an evolutionary feature that made crawling through burrows less messy. And yes, as mentioned before, the males had pouches too. Not for carrying young, but likely to protect their delicate bits while bounding through thorny underbrush. You've got to admire that kind of foresight. Evolution gave the thylacine built-in armor. Historians still argue whether the male pouch was functional beyond that. Some suggest it was vestigial. Others think it played a role in thermoregulation. But in any case, it made the species one of the few where both sexes had pouches. You can almost hear nature chuckling softly in the background. You slide a little deeper into the den and run your hand along the packed soil. Smooth in some places, grooved in others, maybe old claw marks, maybe erosion. But you let your imagination wander. Maybe pups once scrambled here, blind and warm mouths, Rooting for milk, tiny striped backs wriggling in a tangle. Thylacine litters were small, 2 to 4 pups on average. Each one carried in the pouch until large enough to ride on the mother's back or follow her through the undergrowth. They grew slowly, lived quietly. No fanfare. Just a long, cautious childhood shaped by shadow and instinct. There's something deeply sad and sweet about marsupials. Unlike many placental mammals, their young are born absurdly underdeveloped, like gummy bears with ambition, and then finish growing in a pouch safe and snug while the world outside thunders and bites. There's a poetic vulnerability to it. A reminder that survival starts soft. The den begins to hum with imagined life. You picture a mother thylacine, curled in the corner, her ribs rising slowly with each breath. Rain dripping at the entrance, one ear twitching at distant thunder. Her pups nestling closer in the warm dark. And then a sound. You freeze. No real direction. Just a kind of half noise. That might be water, or breath, or memory. You hold still. Let the forest decide what to reveal. After a moment, it relents with a small gust of wind that rustles the ferns outside almost like a sigh. You crawl back out, brush the mud from your palms, and sit just beside the entrance, cross-legged in the mulch. The den is empty, of course, but not lifeless. Places like this don't die. They just wait. In the 1920s, trappers claimed to find dens filled with stripped bones and fur, not messy like devil dens, more surgical. Some believed thylacines were fastidious eaters, often cleaning meat from bones with surprising care. Others argued that these findings belonged to other animals. The line between lore and biology blurred fast, and stayed that way. One quirky anecdote from an old bushman's diary, he swore he once peeked into a thylacine den and found a nest made not of leaves but of crumpled paper and an old sock, stolen from a nearby shearing shed. It's likely apocryphal, but who wouldn't want to believe a thylacine pup once napped on someone's lost laundry? Historians still debate whether the thylacine ever had permanent dens or simply moved frequently depending on food and weather. Most likely, they were semi-nomadic, returning to favored hollows when the landscape offered enough peace. And that's the real tragedy, isn't it? Peace became harder to find. As sheep herds grew and settlements spread, the quiet places shrank. Dens were burned out. Burrows collapsed by plows. And with no real conservation ethic in place, no one thought to map or preserve these tiny sanctuaries. You run your fingers through the wet ferns around the den's entrance. Imagine the last mother thylacine, somewhere out here in the 1930s, curled up in one of these hollows, her pups twitching in sleep, never knowing they were the last. It's a chilling thought, and an oddly calming one, because the forest is still here. The rain still falls. The den still exists. Even if its purpose has faded, you stand again gently and let the hush wrap around your shoulders. Not the silence of absence, but the quiet of respect, of reverence. You walk away without looking back. Some places don't like to be stared at. And as the rain quickens, tapping a rhythm into the leaves overhead, you feel something settle behind your ribs. A stillness, a recognition, a stripe of memory. Because now you've seen the den. And maybe, just maybe it saw you too. You step gently away from the den boots, sinking into loam thick with leaf mulch, and the scent of slow decay. The forest hushes again behind you, as if the den has closed its mouth and swallowed the story. You don't turn back. Some places are meant to stay behind you like old dreams or the final page of a favorite book. Ahead, the forest thins just a little, and you hear it before you see it, the roll of thunder over distant hills. Not aggressive, more like an old stomach rumbling deep and patient. The rain thickens with it steady now, soaking into your shoulders, your sleeves, the top of your socks. The kind of rain that doesn't ask permission. It just becomes part of you. You crest a mossy ridge and the canopy opens just for a moment. Enough to glimpse a ghost of gray sky above, blurred and streaked with cloud. And below, nestled among a crooked line of river gums, a crumbling wooden fence. The remnants of a farm. This is where it happened. Not this exact spot maybe, but this kind of place. 100 little farms like this one dotted Tasmania's interior by the late 1800s, bringing sheep to a land not made for them. And with sheep came fear. With fear came bounties. And with bounties came the slow, paperwork-shaped doom of the Thylacine. You walk along the line of broken fence posts. Barbed wire clings in rusty loops, half swallowed by trees. A gate lies face down in the mud, its hinges long devoured by time. It creaks faintly in the wind, just enough to make you wonder if it remembers what it once kept out or in. The colonists came with familiar fears. They'd seen wolves take livestock back in Britain or jackals in Africa. So when they glimpsed a long-snouted, stripy animal with an unsettling yawn and a disinterest in human company, they didn't hesitate. They blamed it. Historians still argue whether the Thylacine ever posed a genuine threat to colonial livestock. Most modern ecologists lean toward no. It was solitary. It hunted a small game. Its jaw, though wide, wasn't particularly strong, not compared to feral dogs or foxes which arrived later and arguably did far more damage. But the Thylacine looked the part, and sometimes that's enough to get you a price on your head. The government offered bounties starting in the 1830s. £1 per adult, 10 shillings for a pup. Adjusted for today, that's a decent reward. Enough to buy a week's groceries. Enough to make shooting one feel like a small win. And shoot them they did. Some trappers specialized in it. Skins were nailed to barn walls, skulls hung over fireplaces. The Thylacine wasn't just hunted, it was collected. A faint chuckle slips from your lips. There's something bleakly human about that. To mistake something for dangerous, destroy it, and then treat its remains like trophies. Look at this thing I misunderstood into oblivion, the old farmers might have said. You duck beneath a sagging rafter from what used to be a shed. Inside there's a rusted trap, its teeth splayed awkwardly in the dirt. Not sharp anymore, just sad. You can almost hear the thump of a captured paw, the yelp, the struggle, the stillness. Maybe that's just your imagination. But maybe the rain carries echoes here. Some researchers estimate that over 2,000 thylacines were killed through the bounty program alone. That's not counting the ones hunted for sport, caught in fences, or left to starve in disappearing habitats. Others put the number higher, much higher. It's impossible to know exactly. And what makes it worse, what makes it sting like lemon on a paper cut, is that some of those same farmers who wiped out the Thylacine later had to deal with the real pest foxes and feral cats. The ecosystem spiraled out of balance. Small mammals vanished. Insects surged. The sheep didn't get any safer. Sometimes the villain wasn't a villain at all. Just a misunderstood middle manager in a very fragile food chain. You wander to the edge of the clearing where a single chimney stands like a finger pointing nowhere. The stones are warm from the memory of fire, though the hearth hasn't burned for decades. A tangle of vines snakes through the base, curling up like questions no one ever answered. One fringe historian, Dr. L.C. Farrow, once proposed that early settlers may have wanted the Thylacine to be a monster, that colonial life was harsh, uncertain, and full of shadows, and people needed something to project that fear onto. It wasn't about facts, it was about catharsis. It's not a mainstream theory, but it's an interesting one, because it makes you wonder how many creatures have we hunted not because they hurt us, but because they reminded us of something we feared. You lean on the chimney for a moment, rain tracing rivulets down your temple, and you picture it just for a second. A thylacine darting across this clearing in the twilight, stripes, rippling tail, low ears forward. Not snarling, not attacking, just trying to survive a story it didn't get to write. The wind shifts again, carries a faint earthy smell of sheep dung and old tobacco. Memory clings to this place like dew. Even today, some families in Tasmania still talk about the thylacine, the way one might speak of a troublesome neighbor. They were always around, one old man told a researcher. You'd hear them cough at night like someone clearing their throat behind a tree. The thylacine didn't howl. It didn't bark. It coughed. A short, chuffing exhale, almost polite. Scientists still aren't sure exactly what the vocalizations meant. Alarm communication, annoyance. One early 20th century zookeeper claimed his thylacine grunted when it wanted food and sneezed when it was irritated. Another claimed it purred. Another said it made a sound like a mix between a hiccup and a sigh. The science never nailed it down. We just weren't listening hard enough early enough. You take one last look around the ruins. The fence, the trap, the gate, the shed. Then you turn not away from it, but through it. Let it dissolve into the mist behind you, because even though the colonists didn't hear the warning coughs, you're hearing them now. And maybe that's the beginning of remembering. The rain softens now, less insistent, more like a steady heartbeat. The trees close back in as you leave the old settlement ruins behind. The chimney disappears into the fog with a final shrug, like history rolling over in its sleep. You follow a narrow game trail, barely more than a crease in the ferns. Each footstep releases the scent of crushed greenery, wet bark, and something deeper. The mineral memory of 1,000 rains falling exactly here. Your path parallels a creek for a while. It gurgles gently to your right, weaving over smooth stones. Like it's humming a lullaby only the forest knows. You catch your reflection in a pool blurred and stretched by ripples. For a moment, it looks like someone else. Something else. You blink, and it's just you again. You pass a heap of twisted wire. Fence remnants maybe. Or part of a forgotten trap. The forest does its best to digest these artifacts, but some metal just refuses to rust quietly. That brings you to one of the Thylacine's final humiliations. See, as the 20th century marched forward loud and proud with radio cars and pop music, the Thylacine stayed stuck in a world made of shadows and streams. But humans weren't content to let it fade in peace. They wanted one last glimpse, one last photo, one last prize. So the scientists came. In the 1920s and 30s, conservationists and zoologists began to panic. Not because they missed the thylacine necessarily, but because they realized it was almost gone and they'd failed to collect good data. Almost no film footage existed. Very few close-up photos. No comprehensive studies on behavior or diet. The world's largest carnivorous marsupial, and we'd basically filed it under MISC. Historians still argue whether this was due to budget issues, lack of interest, or simply that no one thought the extinction would really happen. Maybe it was all three. But in those final years, a frantic scramble began. One man in particular stands out, David Flea, a Queensland naturalist with a stubborn streak and a camera. Flea was among the first to truly understand what we were about to lose. In 1933, he traveled to Hobart to film Benjamin, the last captive thylacine. The footage he captured is haunting. Black and white, 35 seconds long. Benjamin paces his cage, stiff-legged and tired. He stops, yawns, one's jaw opening to that eerie 80-degree gape, then looks directly at the camera. And right there in that yawn, you feel it, the weight of all the missed opportunities. The cage is concrete. The floor is bare. No enrichment, no shelter from the cold. Just a wire fence and a final audience. You pause in the forest, now standing beside a twisted root that arcs like a cradle. The rain has pulled into curve. You dip your fingers in the water. Cold, still. Benjamin died in 1936. The official cause, exposure. Locked outside his shelter during a cold snap. A mistake. A forgotten latch. A careless moment. The last known thylacine gone not with a gunshot or a trap, but with a shrug. Flea's footage became the only video evidence we have of a living thylacine. 35 seconds. That's it. If you re-watch it long enough, you start to notice little things, how stiff Benjamin's gait is, how low his tail droops, how slow that yawn really is. Not wild, not healthy, just waiting. It's painful to admit that the only film we have of this species is of its decline. It's like finding a single photograph of a lost loved one and they're half blinking in a hospital bed. You keep walking deeper into the mist. Each step feels slower now. Not from fatigue, but from the weight of knowing. The forest presses close again as if trying to comfort you. Or distract you. A kookaburra cackles somewhere to your left. A possum rustles in a tree. Life goes on. It always does. And yet, something is missing. That's the hardest part about extinction. It's not the silence. It's the change in the silence. That subtle gap in the soundscape where a certain cough should have been. A certain footstep. A certain stripe in the underbrush. Ecologists sometimes talk about ecological memory, how an ecosystem remembers what used to live in it. Predator-prey relationships, plant-animal interactions, even scavenger routines all adjust when something disappears. But those adjustments take time. Sometimes centuries, sometimes never. Historians still argue whether Tasmania's ecosystem ever truly recovered from losing the thylacine. Some say the devils filled the niche. Others disagree, pointing out that devils are scavengers, not hunters. Different tools, different jobs. And in the absence of thylacines, something strange began to happen. Rabbits exploded in number. Wallaby populations fluctuated. Insects surged because fewer carcasses were cleaned from the bush. The devils overcompensated. Diseases spread faster. The rhythm went offbeat, all because one animal was misjudged, mismanaged, and misplaced into myth. You find a log and sit, letting the drizzle soak in. Through your coat, the creek beside you chuckles softly, unaware of extinction. Or maybe not. Maybe water remembers. Maybe it carries DNA memory sorrow. You think about Flea standing with his tripod and camera in the Hobart Zoo, filming a dying species because it was the only thing he could do. He once said in an interview, "I was struck with a deep sense of failure. We didn't act fast enough. And now all we can do is watch the film and pretend it's enough." It wasn't, but still we watch. Still we wait. Still we wonder. And tonight, in the rain-soaked hush of this forest, maybe, just maybe, you don't have to pretend anymore. Maybe you do feel something shift in the dark. Not just memory. Something else. Something walking. The trail is gone now. Not even a whisper of a path under your feet. Just spongy moss, curling roots, and the soft squelch of damp soil with every step. You're walking not through space, but through memory. The forest reshaping itself around you. Like it knows why you've come. Like it remembers too. It's quieter here. Not silent, never truly silent, but the bird song is sparser. Even the rain seems to hush in reverence. You duck beneath a low-hanging branch and emerge into a wide clearing overgrown with reeds and ringed with tall old gums. At the center, a rusted iron fence, barely waist-high, almost entirely consumed by lichen. And behind it, a rectangle of crumbling stone. A plaque, weather-beaten and barely legible, catches your eye. You wipe it gently with your sleeve. Benjamin died 7th September 1936. Last known Tasmanian Tiger. This is it, the cage. Not the actual one from Hobart Zoo, of course. That's long gone bulldozed and built over. But someone, perhaps a local council or a quiet conservationist, recreated the space here. Symbolic, haunting. A tribute to the animal that slipped through history's fingers like wet fur. You step through the open gate boots, clicking softly on cracked flagstones. The space is smaller than you imagined. It always is. Somehow, we give legends more room in our minds than they ever had in life. You pace the perimeter 10 steps, long 6 steps wide. Just enough space to turn around, to yawn, to wait. Benjamin lived his final 3 years here alone, misgendered for much of that time, by the way. For decades, zookeepers believed he was female. Only in the 21st century did researchers closely examine the footage and determine he was male. A final indignity, to be both misunderstood and misidentified even in captivity. You run a hand along the rusted bars. They hum faintly beneath your fingers, just the wind probably. Or memory echoing against iron. Here's something they don't often mention: Benjamin's cage had no roof. Not because he was especially trusted, but because thylacines weren't climbers. They didn't jump. Their stiff tail and short legs made leaping a challenge. So why bother with a roof? He wasn't going anywhere. That detail stinks a little. Historians still argue whether Benjamin was truly the last. After all, isolated sightings continued for years. Some claim there were other thylacines in captivity, undocumented, misfiled, lost to poor record-keeping. Others suggest that wild ones might have survived into the 1940s, hiding in Tasmania's densest forests. But officially, Benjamin was it, a living species distilled down to a single yawning shape behind bars. He died of exposure on a cold night when no one remembered to let him inside. No one even noticed for hours. That's how the last known thylacine disappeared, not in a blaze of gunfire, but in a bureaucratic shrug. The day after his death, newspaper headlines barely mentioned it. A few lines, a box in the corner. Tasmanian Tiger dies at Hobart Zoo. Underneath, an ad for soap. You sit cross-legged in the middle of the space rain pooling in the seams of your sleeves. You close your eyes and picture him there, curled in the corner, ears twitching, breathing slow, the world narrowing to a small rectangle of wire and sky. You wonder what he thought about, if he remembered running, if he remembered his mother's den, if he dreamed of hunting or of grass beneath his paws, or if he simply didn't remember much at all. A soft joke sneaks into your thoughts: the last Tasmanian tiger was a night owl, a literal nocturnal recluse, just like you. Except you've got internet and delivery apps, and he had cold concrete. Funny how extinction can feel like being ghosted by nature itself. You glance up. A single beam of light pushes through the clouds overhead and lands on the edge of the fence. catching a droplet that slides slowly down a rusted post. It gleams for a second, then drops. Gone. You walk the perimeter once more, this time slower. You count the steps. You feel the weight. You understand now why this space was built. It's not for Benjamin. He's long past knowing. It's for you, for us, for anyone who forgot that animals can vanish in plain sight. Not with a roar, but with a whimper if we aren't listening. And speaking of listening, you stop mid-step, head tilting slightly. Was that? No, probably not, but maybe. A soft cough. Not human, not mechanical. A short, breathy exhale. In the distance. You strain to hear it again, heart pausing like a held breath. But the rain comes louder like the forest changed the subject. Still you can't unhear it. One more fact before you leave this cage behind. Benjamin was named after no one in particular. He was never officially recorded with that name. It only appeared decades later passed around in conversation until it became canon. He might have had another name once. Or none at all. The last of his kind, and we didn't even bother to ask. You step out of the cage. The wind swirls and carries the scent of wet iron and regret. And then, because it feels right, you reach back, gently pull the gate close behind you. It squeals faintly, then clicks into place with a final sigh. Not because you're locking it in, because you're letting it go. And maybe that's what this journey is, not a search for something lost, but a slow acceptance that remembering is a kind of return. The cage fades behind you as the forest takes it back. And somewhere just beyond, hearing the trees exhale, you leave the cage with a quieter step, like the forest itself has lowered its voice. Rain tapers to a mist, caught in slow motion drips from every leaf and branch. The hush deepens. You're walking in what might be late afternoon or early evening. It's hard to tell through the canopy. The light isn't golden, it's worn. Like an old page in a book you've read too many times. Ahead, the path widens into a fern-ringed clearing, spongy underfoot, soft with moss, the kind of place that feels both accidental and sacred. You pause beside a tree where someone long ago nailed a weatherproof case to the trunk. A small solar panel blinks faintly. Below it, a modern trail camera. Its plastic body slick with rain. You've just stumbled into the present-day obsession, the search. Trail cams like this one dot the island now. Hundreds of them blinking silently in the woods, hoping to catch one flicker of stripe, one twitch of that telltale tail. Some belong to government biologists, others to hopeful amateurs. And some are funded by fringe organizations that still believe Tasmania's most famous ghost is flesh and blood. You step around the camera with care. No need to photobomb someone's midnight vigil. They're watching for something they're not even sure exists. That kind of hope deserves respect. Let's talk about the people who never gave up. The post-Benjamin era saw a strange evolution. Not of the Thylacine, but of the story around it. Because once something is declared extinct, it doesn't simply disappear. It becomes folklore, myth, a campfire anecdote, a blurry shape at the edge of a dash cam. And in the case of the Thylacine, it became a full-blown cultural fixation. One of the most persistent figures in this world is Neil Waters, founder of the Thylacine Awareness Group of Australia. He's not a scientist, he's a gardener. But for years, he's poured his spare time into collecting sightings, setting up cameras, and organizing expeditions. In 2021, he made international news after claiming to have captured clear images of a juvenile thylacine. Excitement spread like wildfire. The images were released. Analysts chimed in. Wildlife experts frowned. The verdict, very likely a spotted quoll. Similar size, similar shape, similar stripes. Not a thylacine. Still, Neil didn't back down. He maintained his position. To this day, he and his group continue the search. Not for fame, he says, but because someone has to believe. And in a way, he's not alone. Cryptozoologists, naturalists, hikers, school teachers, so many have joined the chorus over the decades. Some stake their reputations on it. Others just leave anonymous notes and sketches online. One woman, a retired nurse from Devonport, sends yearly Christmas cards to a conservation office with new maps marked in red where she swears she saw a thylacine in 1987. Another man, a school janitor, mailed in fur samples collected from a fence post. DNA analysis confirmed the possum. But every so often, something stranger arrives. One blurry photo from 2002, taken near the Arthur River, shows an animal crossing a logging road head-down stripes, visible tail rigid. Too big for a cat. Too wrong for a dog. Too real to dismiss outright. Historians still argue whether these blurry bits of evidence deserve scientific attention. Some insist it's wishful thinking wrapped in pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. Others believe we should at least investigate with an open mind. After all, we've been wrong before. In 1938, scientists rediscovered the coelacanth, a fish believed extinct for 66 million years. In 1966, the Lord Howe Island stick insect, thought wiped out by rats, was found clinging to life on a single volcanic outcrop. Nature has a habit of surprising us. But even if the thylacine is not out there, and let's be honest, the odds aren't great, the story still matters. Because hope keeps memory alive. And memory, strange as it sounds, might be the thylacine's last habitat. You crouch beside the camera, watching the way the lens stares blankly into the trees. Patient, tireless, unblinking. Most of these cameras capture nothing. Night after night. Wallabies, bandicoots, the occasional curious devil sniffing the lens. But still they wait. And every morning someone checks the SD cards, just in case. Because just in case is powerful. You walk further into the clearing where someone has placed a pile of stones in a deliberate little pyramid. At the top, a carved wooden thylacine. A child's carving, probably. Its legs are stubby stripes, uneven, one ear chipped. But it's beautiful, weathered and quiet, staring into the underbrush like it remembers something you never saw. You kneel beside it, trace the stripes with a fingertip. Rain slips off your knuckle, dapples the wood. Here's something curious even as mainstream science tries to maintain a careful distance. The public love affair with the thylacine has never waned. Its image appears on beer bottles, bumper stickers, postage stamps. There are bands named after it, skateboards, murals in Hobart alleyways, t-shirts that read, "I believe." No one's wearing Tasmanian devil shirts, but the thylacine, still walking across our cultural landscape like it owns the place. And maybe that's the most miraculous part, because for an extinct species, it's remarkably alive in our minds, in stories, in jokes, in dreams. You don't get that with frogs or snails. The thylacine became more than itself, more than a marsupial predator with a bad PR campaign. It became a symbol of something we lost, too late to save and just early enough to mourn properly. You stand stretched and look into the woods where the camera's lens points. You squint, hoping for nothing, but still, no movement. But your ears are open, and in the stillness you swear like before there's a cough. Dry, low, not hostile, just there. You hold your breath. Listen harder. Nothing. Again. You smile. Not because you believe it was real. Not because you don't, but because right now it doesn't matter. The search is part of the species now. The trail camera clicks once, a soft mechanical whir, and just maybe it saw something. Fog snakes in through the trees as you leave the trail camera behind, curling around your boots like it's trying to tug you gently off the path, not to mislead you, just to suggest a more interesting route. You let it. The ground softens again. Wet moss rises like cushions beneath your feet. Every sound is muffled. You are walking through a world turned inward. Your path veers slightly downhill toward a ravine. The trees lean in close here, heavy with dripping moss and old secrets. A branch above creaks slowly in the wind. Somewhere nearby, a single bird calls, then falls silent. The quiet is thick enough to touch. And now we get to one of the Thylacine's strangest legacies, misidentifications. The moment an animal is declared extinct, the world gets blurry. People want to believe they've seen what can't be seen. And in Tasmania, where fog and shadow are part of the daily decor, those beliefs have flourished. It's not just the odd hiker or hopeful cryptozoologist. It's farmers, postal workers, teachers, police officers, people with no incentive to lie and no reason to make a fuss. Some of them never even report their sightings. They just tell a friend. Or write it in a notebook. Or whisper it to the wind in a place like this. You reach a fallen log and sit for a moment back against the bark water soaking through your pants, not that it matters now. You pull your jacket tighter and let your mind drift. What would you do if you saw one? Not just a flicker, but a full view. Head turned. Stripes gleaming in the low light. A jaw just starting to open in that wide, ghostly yawn. Would you reach for your phone? Would you freeze? Would you even trust your eyes? One of the most famous Oops Not a Thylacine stories happened in 1980 when a farmer near Waratah shot what he claimed was a young thylacine, raiding his chicken coop. He stuffed the animal and put it on display in his shed for visitors to come see. But upon examination, quoll. Just a very large and particularly rude quoll. Historians still argue whether some of these reports come from wishful thinking or honest confusion. The human brain isn't exactly reliable under pressure. And when we want to see something, sometimes we fill in the blanks on our own. That flick of a tail stripe. That stiff-legged trot, yep, classic thylacine. That cough couldn't be a possum. But there are still sightings that resist easy explanation. One came from two park rangers in 1995 who claimed to have seen a pair of striped animals cross a dirt road near Cradle Mountain at dusk. These were trained professionals. They knew the local fauna. They knew what a devil looked like. And they were both sure, absolutely sure it wasn't one. They described the gait, the stripes, the tail, the eerie calmness of the movement. Like it was supposed to be there, one of them later said. No photos, no evidence, just testimony. The file was quietly closed. You shift slightly, brushing a slug off your sleeve. He seems unimpressed with your reverie. Then there's the famous case of Peter, a German tourist who in 2013 was driving along a forest road near Lake Peter. He stopped to stretch his legs, camera in hand. That's when he saw it. A long animal with a thick tail, stripes on the back, and a head like a fox. He raised the camera, snapped 2 photos, and then, as these stories often go, the animal vanished into the undergrowth. The images were released, fuzzy, unclear. Maybe a dog, maybe a fox, maybe, well maybe. They sparked debates online, articles, Reddit threads 10 miles deep. The kind of internet storm only a possible thylacine can create. Biologists dismissed the photos. Too vague, too convenient. But others weren't so quick to let it go, even if it's just a dog. One commenter wrote, "I want to live in a world where it could be a thylacine." That's the point, isn't it? You're not just looking for a lost marsupial. You're looking for possibility. A bit further down the slope, you come across another trail cam. This one is newer, sleeker. Probably private. You see a laminated tag with a phone number. Someone's field number. A true believer. You smile and keep walking. May their inbox one day be blessed with a miracle. Beyond the camera, the trees part slightly and reveal something unexpected. A small shack built of corrugated metal and timber slumped slightly to one side like it's had a long life. It's not marked on any map. No signs, no lock, just a place forgotten by time. Inside, you find what you expect: a camping chair, an old thermos, a stack of faded notebooks, and pinned to one wall dozens of sketches, all thylacines, some drawn in colored pencil, others traced from textbooks. A few are clearly from children thylacines, with goofy smiles, big floppy ears, and tails that look suspiciously like candy canes. But the last row is different. They're all the same drawing, same pose, same stride, one leg forward, tail out, head turned slightly. But each is drawn by a different hand. Dozens of interpretations of one moment, one sighting. All slightly different, like people trying to describe a dream they only half remember. And maybe that's what the thylacine is now, a shared dream. A cultural hallucination we've decided collectively not to wake up from. You flip open a notebook left on the table. Inside field notes, dates, coordinates, weather conditions, and always the same closing line. No sighting, but still listening. You put the book back gently and leave the shack without closing the door. Let the next person find it just as you did. This place doesn't want to be shut. Back outside, the mist thickens again. Night isn't here yet, but it's close. You can feel it in your bones. In the way the birds have gone quiet. In the way the air is suddenly full of maybe. You think again of those sketches, those reports, those blurry frames. And you wonder, what if one of them was real? What if the story we've been writing this whole time isn't about extinction? What if it's about what we're willing to believe in, even after the facts stop returning our calls? You walk on, slowly now. Because in this forest, on this path, you're not just chasing a thylacine. You're chasing the line between what was and what might still be. The path narrows again, more suggestion than trail. Now threading through underbrush that grabs lightly at your legs like it's trying to keep you close. You duck under another low branch and find yourself in a dip between two hills where the ground turns slick with moss and the trees lean together like conspirators. The air here is different. Still damp, still rich with petrichor, but warmer. Closer. You pause to breathe it in. The scent of wet earth, bark resin, and something else faint and gamey like the ghost of fur rubbed against bark. Probably wallaby. Possibly possum. But for a moment your brain whispers, Thylacine, and suddenly you remember how strange its body really was. We've hinted at it, those stiff legs, the long tail, the stripes. But the more you dig into the anatomy of the thylacine, the more it starts to feel like someone hit randomize on nature's design software. Start with the header. From a distance, it looked like a dog's. Long snout, pointed ears, narrow skull. But the closer you get, the weirder it gets. For starters, the thylacine's skull has more in common with the Tasmanian devil than with any dog. It's narrow, yes, but the jaw muscles massive. Enough to power that freakish yawning gape. The gape, by the way, remains. one of the most unsettling features in the animal kingdom. Thylacines could open their jaws nearly 80 degrees. Not because they needed to swallow things whole, no snake business here, but because their skulls were built to hinge like a trap, an evolutionary party trick that still has scientists scratching their heads. Historians still argue whether this adaptation had a specific purpose or was simply an inherited quirk. Some suggest it helped the thylacine crack open tough prey, while others point out that no known prey in Tasmania really required that kind of overkill. Maybe it was just what evolution gave them, like that one drawer in your kitchen that only holds broken scissors. Then there's the tail. At first glance, it looked like a dog's. But watch the footage carefully. Benjamin in his cage, pacing stiffly. That tail doesn't wag, doesn't curl. It's rigid. More like a kangaroo's tail used for balance, not expression. If a thylacine was happy to see you, it probably didn't show it with its rear end. That tail, combined with a back that sloped gently downward, gave the thylacine a kind of mechanical look, almost like a puppet, or one of those robotic dogs from early CGI movies, realistic, but not quite right. And let's not forget the pouch, or pouches plural. As mentioned earlier, both male and female thylacines had them. In females, it functioned much like a kangaroo's, a snug, backward-facing nursery for undercooked babies. In males, it served more like a protective flap over their delicate cargo. It's one of only 2 known species of marsupial where the males got in on the pouch party. The other, the water opossum. Nature is an improv comic. Sometimes she makes choices just to see if we're paying attention. You walk a little further until you find a stump wide enough to sit on. The bark is soft and slick, and the wood beneath creaks just a little as you settle in. You let the sounds of the forest take over again. Raindrops tapping, leaves shifting, your heartbeat slowing, and you imagine it. Not just a thylacine, but you as one. You crouch low in the underbrush, ears perked forward. You've smelled something, not prey, not danger, just change. Your tail flicks once, your nose twitches. The night is damp and your den is behind you, safe hidden. You pad forward a few steps. No sound. Your paws land light on moss. A wallaby nearby chews something lazily. You don't need it. You're not hungry, you're just checking. This forest has been yours for generations. Your mother taught you the old trails. Your father showed you how to listen for the wrong kinds of wind. You've never seen a fence, never heard a gun. You are one of the last, but you don't know that. You're just alive. Then a new smell. Oil, metal, you freeze. Something is coming. The moment passes. You blink, return to yourself, human again, wet jeans and all. You stand and brush pine needles off your sleeves. A twig snaps behind you. Your head whips around. Nothing. Probably nothing. And yet, you keep thinking about that jaw. That bizarre, zipper-like mouth. One naturalist in the 1890s wrote that the first time he saw a thylacine yawn, he nearly dropped his tea. It wasn't threatening, he said. Just surreal. Like the animal had temporarily stopped obeying the normal rules of vertebrate anatomy. The mouth opens in a line that seems to defy bone, he wrote. He wasn't wrong. And while that feature probably evolved long before the thylacine reached Tasmania, it became part of the mystique. Every photo, every drawing, every taxidermy model, they all emphasize the yawn. Open, wide, eternal. It's strange to think we remember this animal not for its hunt or its speed or its intelligence, but for the way it opened its mouth. That's what people cling to. That's what made it memorable. That and the stripes. Oh, the stripes. More than 15 of them across the lower back and tail. Some wide, some thin. No two thylacines had the same pattern. They were like fingerprints, unique, identifying, impossible to replicate exactly. Scientists used to believe the stripes were camouflage, breaking up the animal's shape in dappled light. A fair theory. But others wonder if they served a social function, recognition perhaps. Or maybe just flair. Even now, when artists try to imagine new animals, they often start with the thylacine's back. Those stripes, part tiger, part barcode, feel like a puzzle we never solved. You step off the stump and continue walking, your eyes scanning the underbrush now with new appreciation. You're not just looking for movement anymore, you're looking for stripes. You know they're not there, probably, but your brain wants them to be. Because this animal, this quiet, yawning, striped relic has become something more than marsupial meat and bone. It's become an icon of unfinished business, a symbol of the mistakes we made and the miracle we keep hoping for. And maybe, just maybe, it's watching you too, from just beyond the reach of your flashlight, from the zipper edge of reality, waiting to open its jaw again. You crest another low hill, the earth squelching beneath your boots like it's reluctantly letting go of you. Mist curls up from the ground now, not falling from the sky, but rising from the roots forest. Breath slow and steady. You don't bother wiping the water from your face anymore. You've become part of the landscape, soft-edged and soggy, shaped by rain and memory like everything else out here. Then you stop, not because of something you see, because of something you don't. A sound is missing. No birdsong, no clicking insects, no wind even. Just absence. You tilt your head, straining. And in that strange quiet, you start to think about how the thylacine communicated. Because unlike wolves or dogs, or even their snarly devil cousins, thylacines were not loud creatures. They didn't howl at the moon or bark at intruders. They coughed. Yes, coughed. Dry barking sounds, short and sharp. Described by early settlers as something between a dog's chuff and someone clearing their throat. Not dramatic, not frightening, just odd. There are a handful of written records describing it, but very little audio, none actually. Not a single known recording. So we're left with old letters, keeper notes, and vague recollections from aging bushmen. Some said thylacines would make a series of dry huffs when alarmed. Others mentioned a whimpering squeak when pups were hungry. One bizarre account described a rasping sigh during mating season. But we don't have to unpack that right now. Historians still argue whether these vocalizations were functional communication between pack members or just emotional spillover. Some believe the thylacine had a complex social life. Others think it was solitary to the point of awkwardness. The truth, probably somewhere in between. But here's the kicker: the thylacine had no bark. Not in the way dogs do. And for an animal that's often compared to dogs, that's like finding out your microwave can't heat soup. You walk through the silence deeper now into the hush. And imagine that cough echoing in the trees. You wouldn't hear it unless you were very, very close. Maybe not at all over the rain. Maybe only if the thylacine wanted you to. And that's the thing about communication. It's not always about volume. Sometimes the softest sounds carry the sharpest meanings. The difference between warning and welcome might just be a pause between coughs. You stop beside a tree with deeply scarred bark. Not from fire, from rubbing. A habitual animal behavior. Many mammals mark territory by rubbing scent glands on trees. We've never confirmed if thylacines did this, but it's likely. Other marsupials do. And why shouldn't the ghost dog of Tasmania want to leave a business card behind? You kneel to inspect it more closely. Not fresh, Not deep, but distinct, long parallel grooves. Your logical brain suggests it's from a wombat or maybe a devil. But your hopeful brain whispers maybe not. Communication isn't just sound. It's smell, movement, posture. The way the thylacine moved was a kind of language. That stiff-legged gait. The way it held its tail low. The side-to-side sway when it trotted like it had read about canine movement but never practiced it in front of a mirror. The footage of Benjamin grainy, black and white, full of sorrow, captures that awkward elegance perfectly. He walks like he's navigating a world not built for him. And maybe by 1936 it wasn't. You keep walking. The hush has lifted slightly. A kookaburra lets out a tired laugh somewhere behind you and you welcome it like an old friend returning after a long silence. You wonder what a thylacine would think of you if it were still out here. You stomping around in waterproof boots, breathing too loud, carrying all your questions like a backpack full of stones. Would it cough at you flea-freeze in place and stare? Or would it do what it always did, disappear? And maybe that's its final form of communication, absence. A silence so intentional, it becomes a statement. Not hiding, but refusing. Not fear, but choice. You reach a low ridge and through the trees you glimpse the faint blue glimmer of distant water. A lake. A slow-moving river. Hard to tell. The light is thinning now. Not quite twilight, but certainly evening-minded. Shadows stretch longer. Colors fade to grayscale. It makes sense that an animal like the thylacine thrived in this in-between light. They were crepuscular. Most active at dawn and dusk. Not truly nocturnal, but twilight specialists. Just bright enough to see, just dim enough to go unnoticed. A life lived in margins. That's why so many supposed sightings happen at dusk. Your eyes deceive you most when they're trying to adjust. Your brain, desperate for certainty, fills in the gaps. A fox becomes a thylacine. A dog's tail turns into stripes. A cough becomes a call. But maybe that's not deception. Maybe that's the brain remembering something it never saw firsthand. An ancestral echo. A genetic recognition of a shape that should be here. You reach the water's edge, a wide marshy pool surrounded by reeds and blackwood. The surface is still. Your reflection joins you for a moment, then ripples away. You crouch there for a long time, listening. No coughs, no growls, no footfalls. Just a low buzz of insects and the distant rustle of wind. And you realize this is what the thylacine heard every day. Not cars, not cities, just this world in quiet conversation. A world that didn't need to shout. You close your eyes and try to hear it too. Not with your ears, but with something older. Something beneath language. And for a moment you think you understand. Not what it was trying to say, but why it stopped trying. Because sometimes silence is the loudest sound left behind. You rise from the marshy edge, knees, damp and stiff, and begin moving again. Not hurried, not slow, just steady, like the forest has given you your next direction, without saying a word. The trees here are thinner but taller. The underbrush grows sparse, and the ground firms beneath your boots. Somewhere far above, the sun is dipping low, turning the sky behind the clouds a deeper gray. You don't see it, but you feel it. And as twilight thickens, so too does the sense that this forest isn't just full of memories. It's full of mistakes. Because let's be honest, the thylacine didn't have to go extinct. Its downfall wasn't fate. It wasn't a meteor or a megadrought or an ice age. It was laziness, bureaucracy, fear, human convenience wrapped in colonial logic. You step over a root and think about the bounty system again. The crisp pound notes handed over for corpses. The photo ops with grinning men, holding lifeless striped bodies by the tail. There's something so chillingly mundane about it all. No great act of evil. Just paperwork and payment. A government scheme, a few stamps, a ledger, and over time an empty forest. Historians still argue whether the extinction was entirely due to hunting. Some point to disease, specifically a mysterious illness that swept through captive and wild thylacines alike. In the early 1900s, reports describe animals growing listless, developing sores, and dying without clear cause. Others suggest habitat loss played a larger role, as land was cleared for agriculture, and the Thylacine's prey became scarce. But most agree on this. We had time to intervene and didn't. Even as the population plummeted, zoos failed to breed them in captivity. The last efforts were haphazard at best. In the 1920s, a small group of scientists petitioned for conservation efforts. They were ignored. Too little, too late. You pause beside a tree, marked with blue tape. Some recent forestry survey probably. On the ground near its base lies a weathered sign half buried in leaves. Your protected habitat zone. Do not disturb. It's ironic. Now that the thylacine is gone, we protect the land it no longer walks. A bit like installing a fire alarm after the house has burned down. But humans are good at that memorializing loss instead of preventing it. And yet, in the strange arithmetic of the Anthropocene, some losses hit harder, some echo louder. Why this one? Why does the thylacine haunt us more than so many others? Part of it is timing. We watched it vanish. In real time, we filmed it, we drew it, we stuffed it, we named it Benjamin, and then let it freeze to death in a cage. That kind of closeness sticks. But there's also something about the thylacine's design. Those stripes that stiff-gate the almost dogness of it, that makes it feel like a missed opportunity. Like we were gifted a creature halfway between worlds, and we threw it away before we figured out how it worked. And there's one more factor: it didn't fight back. It didn't charge or claw or roar. It didn't decimate sheep herds or attack humans. It didn't evolve armor or venom or clever escape routes. It just was quiet, solitary, unassuming, and that made it easy to erase. You reach a small ridge now, and the view opens westward. Through the thinning trees, you can just make out a patchwork of farmland, in the distance fences, barns, the silver glint of a rain-wet roof. That's where the story ended. Or began, depending on how you tell it. When settlers arrived in the early 1800s, Tasmania was wild, dense, and teeming with unfamiliar animals. Some were celebrated. Others, like the thylacine, were feared. In the old newspapers, it was called ruthless cunning, a terror of the flocks. Never mind that most evidence for sheep attacks came secondhand or was more likely caused by wild dogs. Fear doesn't wait for facts, and so the thylacine became a villain in a script it didn't write. It was easier to blame the strange than to confront the messy reality of ecological imbalance. Farmers didn't need proof. They needed reassurance, and the government delivered. £1 per adult, 10 shillings per pup, an entire species reduced to an invoice. You take out your flashlight again, not because it's dark yet, but because the forest is beginning to fold in. The beam cuts through the fog, catching droplets midair like tiny glass beads. You sweep it across the underbrush, and there it is, a statue. At first, you think it's a stump, or a particularly ambitious root cluster. But as you approach, you see it clearly, a life-size sculpture of a thylacine. Bronze, weathered, its face turned toward the trees, body frozen mid-step. There's no plaque, no explanation. Just this silent tribute in the middle of nowhere. The detail is stunning muscle curves, tail angled away the stripes disappear just before the hips. Whoever made this knew. Not just the shape, but the spirit. You walk around it once, slowly. From one angle, it looks like it's staring at you. From another, like it's walking away. Maybe both are true. You reach out and touch the cool metal. Raindrops cling to its back like dew. For a second, you imagine the real thing, alive breathing muscles twitching beneath fur. You try to picture what we lost. Not just a body, but a presence. And it hits you the tragedy wasn't just that we drove the thylacine to extinction. It's that we did it before we even understood what it was. A marsupial with a jaw like a bear trap. A tail like a kangaroo. A voice like a cough. A species that didn't quite fit into any box. And so we threw the whole box away. You step back. Let the statue fade into the mist. It deserves to stay mysterious. The forest is darker now. Not night. Not yet, but almost. You keep walking guided by rain memory. And the quiet possibility that somewhere just ahead, another story waits to be heard. The trail begins to vanish again, swallowed by ferns. And the rising pulse of twilight. You don't fight it. You simply let the undergrowth choose where your feet go next. Everything is soaked now, your boots, your sleeves, your thoughts. But there's no discomfort in it anymore. You've adjusted. You've become part of the story. And as the forest darkens, it starts to ask harder questions. Because now it's time to look in the mirror a bit and ask not just how. The thylacine vanished, but why we let it happen in the first place. And the answers, they aren't comfortable. You step onto a low stone ledge, probably the remains of some old colonial foundation, and pause to breathe. The air smells of wet eucalyptus and smoke long faded. You stare out at the trees, their trunks glowing faintly in your flashlight's beam like ghosts in high contrast. Let's talk about colonial logic. When British settlers arrived in Tasmania, they brought with them a system of thinking that had nothing to do with the local ecosystem. To them, animals existed in two categories, useful or problematic. Sheep useful, dogs useful. Kangaroos, slightly annoying, but tolerable. But the thylacine, a striped, stiff-walking carnivore, with jaws that opened like a trapdoor, and no desire to be tamed. Definitely problematic. Historians still argue whether the settlers truly believed the thylacine was a serious threat to livestock, or whether it was more about projection, a need to control every aspect of their new world. Early records are full of exaggeration. Stories of packs of thylacines taking down multiple sheep in a night. Descriptions of unprovoked attacks. But no photographic evidence. No forensic follow-up. Just fear. And fear gets results. Governments don't create bounty programs out of curiosity. They create them to soothe people. To keep order. To prove that they're in charge. The thylacine was never going to win that game. You move past the stones and into a stretch of forest that feels heavier. The trees here lean in closer. Their trunks are black with lichen and old burn scars. You imagine what this place looked like 150 years ago, cleared for pasture perhaps, or scorched to flush out game. You picture a line of traps set along a fence, waiting silently for something striped to step wrong. And you think of the men who set those traps. Not monsters, just men, following instructions, collecting rewards, feeding families. Extinction often doesn't come from villains. It comes from ordinary people doing ordinary things without thinking too hard about the consequences. You brush a branch aside and keep going, your light catching on a long flat rock covered in moss. You pause there and sit. The rock is cold but smooth. It feels like a stage or a pulpit. So let's talk about responsibility. Because as romantic as this search has been, as full of coughs in the dark and stripes in the mist, the truth is that we let this happen. We had the tools, we had the warnings, and we chose not to use them. In 1901, a man named Archibald Meston wrote to the Tasmanian government recommending the immediate protection of the thylacine. He saw what was coming. His letters went unread, or read and ignored. By 1910, sightings were down. Trappers reported fewer kills. The bounties became rarer not because people cared, but because there were fewer targets. And still, nothing. Even as late as 1930, when the species was clearly in freefall, scientists argued about whether it was endangered or just being shy. They argued about the definition of extinction. And while they argued, the last ones died. It wasn't until Benjamin's body went cold in that Hobart cage that someone finally panicked. 2 months later, legal protection was passed. 2 months later, you tilt your head back and stare at the treetops. Rain trickles down your collar. Somewhere far above, a bird flits from branch to branch. But otherwise, all is still. Maybe you're imagining it, but the forest seems to be holding its breath. You start to think about what it means to protect something. Not after it's gone, not in memory, but when it still walks, when it still breathes. Protection requires imagination. Not just science, not just policy. You have to believe something is worth keeping, even if it doesn't produce milk, even if it doesn't come when called, even if it opens its mouth too wide and coughs in weird places and doesn't quite fit the mold. The thylacine never fit the mold. It was an oddity, a hybrid, a relic of another age, and that made it vulnerable. Humans love what they understand, what they can control, what makes them feel safe. But the thylacine, it was none of those things. And that ultimately might have been its crime. You rise from the rock, brushing moss from your hands, and continue walking. The forest opens up again, just slightly revealing another clearing. Not large, just wide enough to see the sky gray and heavy with the last light of day bleeding through like bruises on a cloud. In the center of the clearing, a post. A wooden stake, weathered, old. Tied to it with rusted wire is a laminated page, faded and streaked with water. You walk closer. It reads, "In memory of what we failed to understand in time. May the forest remember what we forgot." No name, no date, no signature. Just that. You stare at it for a long time. And then quietly you nod. Because maybe that's all we can do now, acknowledge the failure and choose to do better. Not just for the thylacine, but for whatever else might still be walking the thin line between shadow and science. Whatever else we might lose if we aren't listening. The clearing fades behind you as you follow a narrow ridge, one that rises like a spine through the forest, dividing one hush from another. You walk slower now, not from fatigue, but from something quieter. A heaviness that's not physical. You've stepped past history into the part where the future peeks out from the bushes. And here, in this liminal space, people are asking a new question. Can we bring it back? You've heard the stories, headlines about cloning, de-extinction, ancient DNA pulled from pickled pelts in museum drawers. The science reads like science fiction, but it's real. Kind of. You dug beneath a dripping branch and smiled to yourself. The idea of resurrecting the thylacine is not fringe anymore. In fact, it's received millions in funding, international support, and a flood of media buzz. At the center of it all is a team at the University of Melbourne, working in collaboration with Colossal Biosciences, a company that has made headlines for also trying to bring back the woolly mammoth. Their approach is clear, extract usable genetic material from preserved thylacine specimens, patch the gaps with the DNA of a close relative like the numbat or dunnart, and implant the resulting embryo into a surrogate marsupial mother. Easy, right? Well, no. Historians and scientists still argue whether it's even ethical, whether it's possible, whether we should, even if we could. You stop beside a white gum tree, lean back against the trunk and listen to the rain tick on the leaves, like soft coat from an old machine. Somewhere a frog croaks once then twice. Let's break it down. Technically we do have thylacine DNA. Several preserved specimens exist in museums. Pickled pups in jars, bones, pelts, and dried organs. One famous thylacine pup has been the subject of more than a dozen genetic studies. Bits of DNA have been sequenced, mapped, catalogued, but that's the easy part. Reassembling that code into a full genome is another beast entirely. Marsupials have quirky chromosomes, fewer than placental mammals arranged differently. Even if we stitch together a Frankenstein genome using dunnart scaffolding, we're still just playing a very ambitious game of biological guesswork. And then there's the gestation problem. Marsupials don't develop like us. Their young are born incredibly early and finish growing inside a pouch. That means we can't use the same surrogacy techniques we've used on mammals like sheep or cattle. We'd need a living marsupial mother with the right pouch conditions. Probably a dunnart tiny insect-eating mouse-sized. So now imagine a full-size thylacine, gestated in something the size of a hamster. You see the issue. And yet, progress continues. The researchers are optimistic. They talk about success not as if but when. They dream of fenced sanctuaries in Tasmania, where thylacines might one day walk again. Born from petri dishes nurtured by science raised with care. You crouch beside a puddle, your flashlight beam reflecting in the still water like an echo. You imagine a thylacine, stepping out of the trees, not wild, not ghostly, but manufactured. Printed from history and programmed to fill a space we left empty. Would it work? That's the other debate. Because even if we bring the thylacine back, we're not bringing back the wild thylacine. Not the one that paced the den you crawled through earlier. Not the one that trotted through mist and coughed at moonlight. What we'd be creating is something new. A close copy. A mirror with just enough fingerprints to make us feel something. It might look like a thylacine, move like one, even yawn like one. But will it know how to be a thylacine? Will it know how to find food, how to raise pups, how to fear the right things and ignore the rest? Or will it be a lab-born animal forever stuck in a zoo enclosure, paraded like an apology we never properly wrote? You walk again, the forest shifting into deeper shadow. The trees thin slightly, and the sky above glows with the last embers of daylight. Deep blue, almost purple like bruised velvet. Another rustle in the bushes. You pause. Again, probably nothing. Or possibly a bandicoot. Or possibly the future. Some ecologists warn that de-extinction is a distraction. That it lets us off the hook. Why save what we have if we think we can just bring it back later like a factory recall? They worry that thylacine cloning becomes a magic trick we use to avoid changing our behavior. Oops, we deleted a species. But don't worry, we've got backups. And they might be right, but others argue that the technology could help us understand how to better protect what's left. That studying marsupial development at this level could lead to breakthroughs in conservation biology. That trying to revive the thylacine isn't about fixing the past. It's about respecting it enough to try. One Australian zoologist put it best. It's not about redemption. It's about responsibility. You sit down on a fallen log and imagine the first clone Thylacine pup opening its eyes. What would it see? A world quieter than the one its ancestors knew. A forest full of strange machines and hopeful faces. It wouldn't know what was lost, but you would. You would remember the silence it was born into. And maybe that's the point. Not to undo extinction, but to learn from it, to feel it deeply enough that we don't let it happen again. The rain eases down to a whisper now. The air is still. The forest waits. You stand and walk on, not looking for the thylacine anymore, but listening for the footsteps of a future, where we finally know how to keep what matters. The rain has stopped, not with a fanfare, just stopped. No applause, no credits. The kind of ending only nature can pull off, simple, unannounced, and absolute. The forest glistens like it's been polished. Leaves glimmer with beads of water, and the soil releases a rich, loamy breath as you walk. The absence of rain reveals the real soundtrack: dripping branches, soft wing beats, a faint rustle too far away to investigate and too close to forget. You descend a shallow slope, and the trees open into a tangled meadow, sparse now with tufts of native grass, swaying gently, and low-lying shrubs shaped by years of wind. A few standing stones mark the boundary of something that once mattered to someone. You move toward one and sit. The granite is cool beneath your hands. And now it's time to talk about what came after. Because the thylacine may be gone, but its departure rearranged everything around it. When the top predator vanishes, there's a shift. Not always immediate, not always obvious. But eventually, something moves into the empty space. In Tasmania, that something was the Tasmanian devil. Smaller, squatter, definitely louder. The devils had always coexisted with the thylacine. One was the cleanup crew, the other the cautious hunter. But when the thylacine disappeared, the devils stepped up. Not by choice, but by necessity. Someone had to eat the scraps, sniff the sands, track the carcasses. And they did, for a while. But in the 1990s, a new crisis hit: devil facial tumor disease. A contagious cancer, one of only a handful known to science. It spread fast devil to devil through bites, feeding, or mating. Tumors grew around the mouth and face, eventually preventing eating and leading to starvation. Entire populations collapsed. Historians don't argue about whether the disease spread rapidly, they argue about why. And some believe the thylacine's absence played a part. Without the predator-prey checks and territory boundaries that thylacines once enforced, devil populations may have surged unnaturally before the crash. More devils, closer contact, faster transmission. You shift on the stone, remembering a phrase from ecology class. Nature abhors a vacuum, but it doesn't always feel it well. The thylacine's niche, its role in the Tasmanian web, was left empty, and the devils tried to squeeze into it. But they weren't built for it. Their jaws could crunch bone, sure, but they couldn't control wallaby populations or disperse seeds in the same way. The balance was off. Some species boomed unchecked, others dwindled. Even the insects noticed. That's what makes extinctions tricky. It's not just about losing one species. It's about breaking a thread and watching the rest of the web shiver. You walk through the meadow, now the stones behind you, and find a well-worn animal trail. Something's been using it regularly. Prints press deep feces, scattered in tufts. Probably wallabies, maybe devils. Could be echidnas if you squint hard enough. But not thylacines, not anymore. Still, as you follow the path, you try to imagine what it was like before the unraveling, before the gaps appeared in the food chain, before the devils grew tumors, before the wallabies forgot to flinch. Because that's the other loss. Not just a body or a behavior, but a memory. Species evolve in relation to one another. They learn each other's rhythms. Prey animals adjust to the way predators hunt. Plants time their flowering to the way grazers move. The thylacine wasn't just a stripe in the trees. It was a tempo in the island's orchestra. And when it left, the music didn't stop. It just got out of tune. You reach the far edge of the meadow and spot something odd. Small wooden stakes evenly spaced, each marked with a code, written in faded marker T14, T15, T16. You recognize this. A rewilding plot, part of a recent effort to track plant growth in areas once occupied by apex predators. These little plots are meant to measure whether vegetation changes in the absence of certain animals, which plants grow unchecked, which ones fade away, which ones get eaten too much or not enough. It's all very scientific and incredibly heartbreaking, because every tiny sprout here, every blossom and blade is growing in a world missing something. And the researchers, they're not just measuring plants. They're measuring absence. It's become a whole field now. Negative ecology. The study of what isn't there. Biologists use motion sensor cameras, audio traps, and soil samples to track patterns left behind by extinction. Imagine that. A science built not on observation, but on subtraction. You crouch beside one of the plots and stare at a single sapling thin, wobbly, fighting for sunlight. Maybe decades ago, a thylacine brushed past its ancestor and left behind a strand of fur, or the scent of caution, or simply a shadow that reminded everything nearby to be alert. That's gone now. And what's left? Grass that grows too tall, pests that come too close, soil that's just slightly different, a rhythm missing a beat. You stand again and glance up. The sky is darker. Stars begin to prick the edges. A bat flits past in a jagged arc, catching the last of the light. Your breath curls faintly in front of you, and you realize the thylacine shaped this island more in its absence than in its presence. It wasn't just a creature, it was a boundary, a caution, a silence that made room for other voices. And now the voices compete. The balance is fragile, but the memory remains. You walk on through the rewilding zone, each stake a small marker of responsibility. A reminder that we're still trying to understand what we broke, and maybe just maybe trying to fix it. Not with cloning, not with hope, but with humility and careful, deliberate listening. The forest thickens again, shadows sliding together like the closing of a curtain. You don't mind. You've walked through enough memory now to understand that darkness isn't the enemy here, it's the default. The forest has always spoken in low light, and tonight you've learned how to listen. A faint breeze stirs the canopy, bringing with it the scent of leaf oil wet stone, and something sweet and unfamiliar, maybe a blossom from a flowering gum, or maybe a perfume spilled by a bird you'll never see. You come upon a clearing, not large, not showy, just a quiet bowl in the earth. The trees lean back slightly to let the sky through. It's the kind of place where stories linger, not in words, but in arrangement. And this story, it's been told 1,000 ways. Because the thylacine, long gone in flesh, lives on in something else now. Myth. You sit on a flat rock, its surface warm from the day, and think about how a striped marsupial evolved into a ghost, then into a legend. Tasmania is full of these stories. Dreamtime myths from the Palawa people tell of striped spirits that guarded hunting grounds. Not monsters, not gods, just watchers. Creatures that walk the edge of the visible world. You hear it in the oral traditions, the way the Thylacine was both feared and respected. It wasn't always hunted. It was sometimes avoided, left undisturbed like a sacred riddle no one wanted to solve too quickly. And then came the colonists, and the myth changed. The creature became exaggerated, larger, more bloodthirsty, almost supernatural in its cunning. Some early settlers claimed Thylacines could open gates with their paws or disappear mid-chase like smoke. One bushman swore they traveled in coordinated hunting groups, taking down sheep like wolves with military precision. Historians still argue whether any of these accounts have basis in fact. Most likely they're a mix of misunderstanding and guilt. It's easier to blame something dangerous than to admit you simply didn't understand what you were destroying. You smile faintly. Myth often starts where knowledge ends. And today, the myths keep growing. There's the black stripe, a cryptid version of the Thylacine, said to haunt the far northwest. Larger than average jet, black with red eyes. Spotted only at night, usually before storms. Descriptions vary, but they all end the same way. The creature turns, looks you dead in the eye, and vanishes. Then there's the cough in the rain, a legend told by campers who claim to have heard something just outside their tents. A series of dry, even coughs. Not human, not devil, just far enough away to be unsettling. In most versions, the sound ends when the camper shines a light, only to find nothing but disturbed leaves and a single paw print, always facing away. Even school children tell stories now. Kids dare each other to find tiger stripes in the woods. Teenagers take night hikes and record sightings for TikTok. Most are playful. A few are sincere. One boy from Burnie made the news for building a cardboard Thylacine trap in his backyard. He said he didn't want to catch one, just prove they still cared enough to visit. And through it all, the Thylacine walks between worlds, half history, half fable. You lie back on the rock and stare at the stars just beginning to show themselves through the drifting mist. A single satellite slides overhead, silent and steady. Somewhere out there, a server holds hundreds of blurry images labeled possible Thylacine. Some are fakes, some are foxes, but maybe just maybe one isn't. And isn't that what myth is for? Not to explain, but to extend. To stretch belief just far enough that we remember how to feel wonder. Because that's what the Thylacine gives us. Now permission to wonder. What if we saw one again? What if it wasn't extinct? What if something could come back? Not just in labs, but in spirit, in instinct. In the quiet parts of the world where our maps get lazy and our data gets soft. You sit up and listen. Still nothing. But then your eye catches a movement. You freeze. There, at the far edge of the clearing, just between two trees, a shape, low, slender, moving stiffly but smooth. You can't see stripes. You can't even see fur. But the gesture is there. That careful pause, that flick of the tail, that sideways glance. You hold your breath, it doesn't move again. And then, before you can blink, it's gone. Just like that. Probably a wallaby, maybe a dog. Possibly your imagination tugged along by 100 stories. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because the moment gave you something real. And that's the power of myth. Not to prove, to remind, to whisper maybe. You rise from the rock and walk toward where the shape had been careful not to step too loudly. The trees remain still. The ferns shiver slightly. A single moth flutters past your face. And you watch it go with the reverence of someone who's seen too much to doubt. You don't need to find it. You already have. You carry it now. Not the animal, the story. And some stories, once felt deeply enough, never leave. You leave the clearing in silence, not wanting to chase away whatever passed through, or whatever idea passed through you. The forest is denser now, the branches reaching low, the ground sloped unevenly, as if this section resists being walked. And still, you walk it. Each step sounds louder now, though your pace hasn't changed. The absence of rain makes everything else feel amplified. Your breath, your footsteps, your thoughts. But the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels intentional. You enter a narrow gully, and immediately the air cools. Damp moss climbs tree trunks in thick mats, and the roots beneath your feet tangle into steps like a staircase built by time. This is the kind of place that doesn't change often. It doesn't get cleared. It doesn't burn easily. It doesn't show up on trail maps. This is reclaimed wild. What happens after the humans leave? You see it all around the return of ferns where fences once stood. The way tree branches curl around an old metal stake, swallowing it like bone. Grass sprouting up through the cracks in a buried cartwheel. All of it slowly, patiently undoing the past. You pause beside a patch of soil where old tracks have been softened by moss. You can just barely make out a print. Not fresh, not readable, just an impression. Could be a devil, could be a wallaby, could be nothing, but it's here, still. And in that moment, you realize something: this forest doesn't wait for humans. It remembers them, sure, but it doesn't wait. It grows over mistakes, wraps loss in green, cushions memory in mulch. It is the very definition of resilience. You move on down the gully through a curtain of vines and into another clearing. This one, smaller, more intimate. You stop. It's beautiful in a quiet, broken way. A rusted gate lies flat in the grass. Just beyond it, half-collapsed, stone steps lead nowhere. A patch of daisies has claimed the spot where a shed used to stand. You can see the outline in the ground: lighter soil, smoother earth. Nature has traced it like a chalk outline. And perched at the edge of this ghost homestead is a small sign, barely hanging onto its frame. Experimental Predator-Free Zone. Est, 1973. Department of Environment and Conservation. It's a relic of one of Tasmania's many failed rewilding projects. A well-meaning attempt to create sanctuaries free of invasive species where native animals could thrive. But without apex predators like the thylacine to maintain balance, the sanctuaries became lopsided ecosystems. Possums overgrazed, wallabies overbred, foxes found their way in. The projects closed. The signs stayed. Historians still argue whether the failure was in the science or the strategy. But one thing's certain: removing a predator without replacing its function creates more problems than it solves. You walk among the ruins and feel something tighten behind your ribs. A small grief, not just for what's gone, but for what could have been. Had we listened sooner, studied deeper, or simply shown more patience. You crouch beside the old sign and run your fingers along the rusted bolts. Beneath the moss, you find initials. Someone carved them here long ago. Maybe a ranger, maybe a scientist, maybe just someone who loved this place enough to leave a mark. You wonder what they thought would happen here, and you wonder what happened to them. You rise again and wander further into the clearing, and that's when you notice them. Burrows. Dozens of them, small, oval, just beneath the shrubs. You kneel beside one and peer in. It's empty now, but clearly used at some point, likely by devils, or maybe bandicoots. But your heart offers another theory. A den. Maybe not a Thylacine's, maybe not ever, but it doesn't matter, because you're starting to understand something essential. The Thylacine is not the only thing we lost. We also lost the idea that wildness could exist without permission. For most of history, humans believed they could control nature, fences, laws, bounties. But when the wild leaves, we don't gain control. We lose the ability to see the world clearly. A healthy ecosystem is messy, unpredictable, full of contradiction and contradiction's children. And the Thylacine, it was the embodiment of that mess. A predator that rarely killed livestock, a carnivore with a pouch, a wolf that hopped, a dog that yawned like a cartoon, a solitary creature that still haunted entire communities. And we erased it because we couldn't fit it into our flowchart. You step out of the clearing and back onto another narrow trail. The air smells of wet earth and eucalyptus bark. Your flashlight's battery flickers slightly, then steadies. The forest feels fuller now. Not with noise, but with presence. Not Thylacines, not directly, but life that knows what to do with the space they left behind. You start noticing signs, marsupial droppings, scratches on trees, the soft crisscross of wallaby tracks in the mud. The wild is not extinct, it's just unchanged. And in changing it has made room for new rhythms. Not better, not worse, just different. But still, you can't help but imagine what it would be like to see one Thylacine here. Not a clone, not a statue, a real one, just passing through. No drama, no proof, just a glimpse. You wouldn't tell anyone. You'd let it walk. Because after all this, you understand something deeper. Some creatures don't need to come back. They just need to be remembered well. The trail shifts again, curving inward like a question mark. You follow it without hesitation now because this isn't really about finding something anymore. It's about moving through the idea of it. The Thylacine isn't a destination. It's the shape of the space it left behind. Ahead, the forest narrows into a sort of corridor thick with wattle and myrtle. The trees press close like they're trying to overhear your thoughts. You lower your flashlight slightly and let your eyes adjust. You don't want to scare anything off. Not tonight. You're listening now not for sound but for lack. That's what scientists call it, acoustic voids. Measurable pockets of silence in ecosystems where certain species have gone extinct. No more coughs in the night. No territorial calls. No bark-like vocalizations from the undergrowth. Just stillness where something used to be. You reach a wide tree stump and sit. It's hollowed with age moss, blooming from the cracks like lacy green smoke. You listen. No Thylacine cough, no rustle of nervous prey. Just wine brushing against bark water dripping from leaves, your breath slowing. And here's the thing, scientists have started studying these silences. Not just as poetic absence, but as real data. Bioacousticians, yes, that's a word set up long-term. Sound monitoring stations in forests like this one. What they find isn't just what is there, but what's missing. A healthy ecosystem has layers of sound, predators, prey, insects, rainfall, movement. When something vanishes, the acoustic fingerprint changes. A missing predator doesn't just remove its own sound, it changes how everyone else sounds too. Birds stop making alarm calls. Prey animals move differently, less cautiously. Even insects shift their patterns, no longer competing with larger background noise. The whole soundscape flattens. It loses dimension. Historians still argue whether we've underestimated the psychological effect of these losses on the human mind. Some researchers believe that people feel calmer in intact ecosystems, not because of visual cues, but because of Nico, sound. Something about a full soundscape tells the nervous system, it's okay, everything's working. And when that fullness is gone, we don't always notice, but we feel it. That's why silence out here doesn't feel peaceful. It feels unfinished. Like the orchestra is warming up, but the conductor never shows. You stare at the darkness beyond the trees and wonder how many times the Thylacine's call went unheard. How many coughs were dismissed as wind? How many movements were written off as dreams? How long an animal has to be quiet before we decide it was never there at all. And then you think of ghosts, because that's what the Thylacine has become in some circles, not just extinct, not just a legend, but a kind of natural ghost. Not scary, not vengeful, just incomplete. In Aboriginal cultures, certain spirits are believed to linger, not to haunt, but to watch. To hold memory steady until it's ready to be passed on. The Thylacine, in a way, has taken on that role. It waits at the edge of the firelight, not seen, but felt. And it's not the only one. Ecologists working in other parts of the world talk about ghost populations. These are species that might still exist, species declared extinct, but occasionally glimpsed, reported, half-documented. Elusive, impossible to prove, impossible to forget. The ivory-billed woodpecker, the Baiji River dolphin, the South Island kokako, and the thylacine. They live in the same blurry zone between myth and mistake, between faith and data. You stand now, moving carefully through the corridor. Your light flickers again, then steadies. You don't need it much anymore. Your eyes are adjusting. Or maybe you're just seeing better in the dark. You stop again at a small rise. And here it is, a metal box mounted to a tree. Another odd listening station. You've seen trail cams. But this is different. This one isn't watching. It's recording. 24/7. Listening to the forest. Archiving every cough, rustle, chirp, and howl. There's a laminated sheet tacked beside it, faded but readable. Soundscape Survey. Point 14B. Glen. Echo Forest Range. Please do not disturb. Audio. Monitored for endangered species detection. You smile at the name. Glen Echo. How appropriate. You place your hand gently on the box just for a second. It hums faintly, not from power but from purpose. Somewhere a researcher will listen to the sounds this machine collects. Maybe for months, maybe for years, maybe for nothing. Or maybe one night they'll hear it. A dry cough, short, sharp, faint, not quite a devil, not quite a fox. Familiar, unplaceable, and impossible to ignore. Would it matter? Would it change anything? Maybe not. But maybe in that moment the sound alone would be enough. Enough to remind us what it means to listen for something that's not there. To care enough to try. To hope without needing proof. You step away from the recorder and back into the trees. The silence follows. But this time it feels different. This time it feels full. You walk without thinking now, letting the rhythm of your footsteps match the quiet pulse of the forest. No need for direction. You've gone beyond geography. This isn't a tour anymore. It's a vigil. The air has cooled. Night isn't approaching, it's here. But it doesn't fall like a curtain. It settles like dust, slow and inevitable. The last light clings to the highest branches, and the trail beneath you glows faintly silver in its memory. And this is the part no one tells you about. What happens when you stop searching? Not because you've given up, but because the search becomes something else. You pass a downed log and see claw marks, deep grooves along the side. Fresh maybe. You lean down to look closer. Could be devil, could be dog, but part of you doesn't care. Not out of apathy, out of peace. Because now you understand that the point was never to find the thylacine. The point was to understand what it left behind. And you've been surrounded by it the entire time. You sit down one last time near a trickling stream that winds around rocks like a thread stitching the forest back together. You dip your fingers in the water. Cold, fast, honest. Let's say something impossible happens. Let's say that tomorrow someone captures a clear video. A thylacine trotting across a field. Or coughing in a grove. Or pausing to stare into a motion sensor lens. What then? Would the world shift? Would policies change? Would scientists scramble donors, pledge tourists, flock? Or would it be just another 15 seconds of virality gone before the next trend rolls in? Maybe we're not ready to rediscover the thylacine. Not because it's too wild, but because we aren't. We still haven't learned how to be caretakers instead of collectors. We still name things in order to own them. We still need to look harder at what we do see before chasing what we think we've lost. And maybe the thylacine knows that. Maybe it waits not in the bushes, but in the behavior of the forest. In the way wallabies flinch at sounds no one hears. In the way devils pause before feeding just long enough to check if something bigger is watching. In the birds that nest higher than they used to. In the silence we now measure with machines. It's not gone. It's just undispersed, broken into echoes and gestures and scars in tree trunks. You rise from the stream bank and take one final look around. The trees sway softly. The stars blink overhead, bashful behind clouds. And you know without certainty, but with conviction, that the thylacine is still here. In the pause before the breeze. In the space between coughs. In the trail that vanishes the second you stop looking at it. And now maybe it's beside you, not as a creature, but as a presence. The forest breathes around you, not loud, not soft, just true. And as your flashlight finally dies, the dark wraps around you like a lullaby. You smile, not because the search is over, but because it doesn't have to be. You settle where you are, no need to move further. The forest holds you gently, like it knows you've come a long way. The air is cooler now, but not cold. Just enough to keep you still. Just enough to tell your body it's time to rest. A breeze moves through the leaves, slow and even. You hear water in the distance, trickling through stone. A bird calls once, then nothing. The night folds over itself, becoming simpler with every minute. And all around you the shape of something lost lingers softly. Not demanding, not haunting, just present. Like breath, like memory, like rain. The thylacine, real or imagined, is here in the hush. It doesn't need to appear. It doesn't need to cough. Its absence is its voice now. And that voice is calm. You've walked the old trails. You've felt the weight of loss. You've heard the silence where sound used to be. And now you rest, because there's nothing more to chase. Only to remember. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften. Let the sounds around you fade into one gentle hum. Forest wind, stream stillness. No noise, no answers, just sleep. The story doesn't end. It just goes quiet. Good night.